I do not know how our institutions could endure unless we so conduct our public affairs and society that every man who is sober and industrious shall be able to make a good, comfortable living and lay something aside for old age and evil days, to have hope in his heart and better prospects for his children. That is the strength of American institutions. Whatever promotes that, I want to favor.
Those are the words of Benjamin Harrison, our 23rd president, and the subject of this, the 23rd episode of the Dead Presidents Podcast.
Welcome to the Dead Presidents Podcast. I'm Stephen Lincoln Douglas.
And I am James J. Hamilton.
And we're here with episode Jordan of the Dead Presidents Podcast, number 23.
The Michael Jordan of presidents, Benjamin Harrison.
That's right.
We'll leave it up to you whether we're describing the basketball or baseball Michael Jordan.
That's just it. But let's begin with Benjamin Harrison at the beginning. Perhaps before the beginning.
Yeah.
Because Benjamin Harrison came from a pretty famous family.
That's right. We've mentioned his family before on the podcast. His great-grandfather, Benjamin Harrison V, a Virginia plantation owner and major revolutionary leader. He signed the Declaration of Independence and served as Virginia governor in the final years of the Revolution, earning him the number one spot on our top 5 most accomplished presidential dads, not counting John Adams and George H.W. Bush, of course. And he was a presidential dad because his youngest son, William Henry Harrison, became our 9th president. And you know everything there is to know about him from episode 9.
That's right. William Henry Harrison's third son, John Scott Harrison, managed the family farm in North Bend, Ohio. He had 3 children by his first wife, who died in 1830. The following year, he got remarried to Elizabeth Irwin, a strict Presbyterian of Scottish ancestry. Together, they had 10 more children, the second of which was Benjamin Harrison, born August the 20th, 1833, in North Bend.
That's right. Young Ben Harrison enjoyed a pretty happy childhood in which he worked on the family farm, enjoyed hunting and fishing, and read many books from his family's large library.
That's right. Supposedly he had free reign of his grandfather's library.
He took advantage. Also, his mother instilled him with religious faith. The family engaged in daily prayer and Bible reading and went to church every Sunday. And of course, when he was only 7 years old, his grandfather became president.
And died 31 days later.
That's right.
Ben Harrison's going to begin his education through private tutors hired to provide instruction to the large brood of Harrison children. One of the teachers stated, quote, Ben was the brightest of the family. At age 14, he is sent to prep school at Farmers College near Cincinnati, where he studies history and politics, and he's taught the importance of moral leadership and social responsibility. He wrote in an essay that, quote, one's ability shall be the measure of his accountability. Hence, as persons increase in wealth and their power of doing good increases in the same ratio, they will be held accountable for all the good they might have done.
Good insight from a very young Ben Harrison. He continued on to college-level courses at Farmers College, and there he also fell in love. Caroline Scott was the daughter of one of Harrison's teachers, Presbyterian minister John W. Scott, who also ran a school for girls. And when the girls' school was moved 20 miles away to Oxford, Ohio, Harrison transferred to Miami University in Oxford so he could stay close to Caroline.
That's right. And there, he is elected president of the Union Literary Society, where he hones his skills as a debater and an extemporaneous public speaker. In terms of extemporaneous speech, Harrison would actually rise to be considered amongst the best of his time. He continues to study political subjects, praising the Compromise of 1850, denouncing intemperance, and emphasizing the importance of commerce and manufacturing. Now, Miami University was heavily Presbyterian, and Harrison attended many religious revivals, formally joined the church, and considered a career as a minister. Instead, he chose to become a lawyer, though in a speech to his classmates, he stated his belief that, quote, civil society is no less an institute of God than the church, and that Christians had a duty to carry Christian virtues into the administration of government.
Then in 1852, he graduated third in his class and moved to Cincinnati, where he began to study law under Bellamy Storer, a prominent lawyer and former congressman. And by this time, he was engaged to Caroline Scott. She remained in Oxford, where she taught piano while completing her studies at her father's school. Harrison was, not yet established in a career, could not yet support a family, but this separation from Caroline was unbearable. He obtained her father's consent, and they were married in October 1853.
That's right. He would refer to her as Carrie, and they would live at his family's farm in North Bend, him commuting to nearby Cincinnati to complete his law studies. Within a month of their marriage, Carrie is pregnant. In early 1854, Harrison was admitted to the bar, and the couple decided to move to Indianapolis, Indiana. Harrison's cousin, William Sheets, was a prominent businessman there, and he praised the growing town as a haven of business opportunities and Presbyterian morality.
Sounds right up Benjamin Harrison's alley.
Indeed it does.
Harrison would struggle to grow a law practice in his new home. He would live off of a very small inheritance and some money provided by his father, who by this time had been elected to the U.S. House of Representatives. But Harrison was making very little money practicing law. He accepted an appointment as a court crier for $2.50 per day. And, as a lawyer, he was gaining a reputation for diligence, intelligence, and his careful preparation and extemporaneous skills made him a powerful public speaker, but he was still attracting few clients.
That's it. Around this time, Carrie's going to give birth to their first child, Russell, but she and the baby would spend time at her parents' home in Ohio, while Ben struggled to get on his feet financially. He had written to a friend that his, quote, one prevailing, overruling characteristic was a determination to succeed in spite of every human obstacle. A faint heart never did anything worthy of a man. He'd also write to Carrie, quote, I have long since made up my mind that with God's blessing and good health I would succeed, and I never allow myself to doubt the result.
He's going to soldier on, and his law business is going to pick up in 1855 when he forms a partnership with William Wallace, a successful, more senior Indianapolis lawyer. And their new firm is going to become a thriving business. Harrison would go on to serve as a commissioner for the U.S. Court of Claims and as a deacon in the First Presbyterian Church of Indianapolis.
And this is going to lead Ben Harrison from the law to politics.
Yep.
Something that's always been pretty important in the Harrison household. He's growing up in the Whig Party of his presidential grandfather. But when that party collapses in the wake of the Kansas-Nebraska Act, he's going to join the new Republican Party. In 1856, he gives campaign speeches on behalf of its presidential candidate, John C. Fremont. When he was introduced as the grandson of President Harrison, he told the crowd, quote, I want it understood that I am the grandson of nobody. I believe every man should stand on his own merits.
Nice. And Benjamin Harrison was indeed his own man, because at this time his father, who is still a congressman, was supporting the presidential campaign of Know-Nothing candidate Millard Fillmore.
That's it.
Young Harrison out on his own. Then in 1857, Benjamin Harrison going to be elected Indianapolis City Attorney. The following year, he becomes secretary of the Indiana State Republican Committee, and helped his fledgling party capture a majority in the state legislature and most of the state's seats in the U.S. House of Representatives.
That's it. That same year, the Harrisons are going to welcome their second child, Mary. In 1860, Harrison is elected Reporter of Decisions for the Indiana Supreme Court, defeating his Democratic opponent Michael Kerr, who would go on to become Speaker of the House of Representatives during the Grant administration. That year he also campaigned for Abraham Lincoln, often quoting Henry Clay's pledge that he would, quote, never by word or thought, by mind or will, aid in admitting to one rood of free territory, the everlasting curse of human bondage.
Wow. Well, back in 1856, Harrison's father had been defeated for re-election to the House, and now in 1860, John Scott Harrison was campaigning not for Lincoln, but for constitutional union candidate John Bell. Once again, he and his son in opposing camps in the presidential election.
That's it, John Scott Harrison preferring the third-party candidates here.
Right, and he criticized his son for the harsh rhetoric that he was using against the, quote, slave oligarchy.
Well, speaking of the slave oligarchy,
Right.
the Civil War breaks out in 1861, and Harrison is occupied by the demands of his private law practice and his Supreme Court reporter's office. He doesn't enlist upon Lincoln's first call for volunteers. He is one of the people that believes that the war's going to be short, and he figures, I'm going to go on working to support my family. Harrison had a brother and nephew living with him, and Carrie was pregnant again, giving birth to a daughter who unfortunately died in infancy. But as the war grinds on into July 1862, Lincoln asks the states to raise 300,000 more troops. It's at this point that Ben Harrison decides to get involved.
That's right. He meets with the Indiana's governor, Oliver P. Morton, who was expressing disappointment with the slow pace of recruitment. Harrison offered to help, and within a month he had recruited the 70th Indiana Volunteer Regiment and was commissioned as its colonel.
There you go.
He's going to be marching off to war.
That's it. Harrison's regiment is stationed in Kentucky and Tennessee, and it spends a year and a half performing reconnaissance and garrison duties. Harrison uses this time to study military text and train his men. He enforces strict discipline, banning liquor from camp, and employing rigorous drilling. He also promotes, quote, a sense of Christian patriotism, and holds frequent religious services and prayers. Now, some of his men are going to complain about his strictness in letters to hometown newspapers, but he's pretty much only concerned with making his men ready for battle, and he believes that this strictness is going to give men confidence in him when the time comes.
And the time came in May 1864 when Harrison's regiment fought in General William T. Sherman's invasion of Georgia. On May 15th, at the Battle of Resaca, a Confederate artillery battery was halting the Union advance when Harrison led the 70th Indiana Regiment in a charge against the battery, capturing 4 huge cannons in fierce hand-to-hand fighting. After the battle, Harrison was placed in command of a brigade that included 4 additional regiments.
That's it. Yeah. He's stepping in when the time comes and stepping in big time. Mm-hmm. His actions are going to win him praise in the newspapers, and he writes to his wife that he was proud to have shown that the family's, quote, famous name is as safe in my keeping as in that of any who now bear the name. We must not, however, forget that to God, who sustains me, belongs all the honor.
That's right. Thanking the man upstairs. Meanwhile, Sherman's army continued its advance, and on July 20th was attacked by Confederates at the Battle of Peachtree Creek just outside Atlanta. Harrison's brigade was placed in the center of the line and withstood heavy assaults. When his men were running out of ammunition, he ordered that cartridge boxes be gathered from the bodies of dead Confederates. The Union Army repelled the Confederate attack and 2 days later captured Atlanta. Harrison's division commander, General Joseph Hooker, said, quote, "Harrison, by God, I'll make you a brigadier general for this fight."
That's it. Sherman stated that Harrison displayed, quote, "foresight, discipline, and a fighting spirit." Harrison would write that his ambition did not, quote, "soar very high. I am not a Julius Caesar nor a Napoleon, but a plain Hoosier colonel, with no more relish for a fight than for a good breakfast."
Nice. Well, after the capture of Atlanta, Harrison was ordered to report home to Indiana's governor, where he helped to recruit more men and campaigned for the Republican Party in the 1864 elections. He was reelected as reporter of decisions, and the Republican ticket swept the state. During the campaign, he praised the Emancipation Proclamation and the vital service of African Americans in the Union war effort.
That's right. After the election, he is placed in command of a brigade under General George H. Thomas in Tennessee. After Sherman captured Atlanta, Confederate forces under John Bell Hood drove north into Tennessee, and as Sherman began his march to the sea, which included Harrison's old 70th Indiana Regiment, he detached Thomas to pursue Hood. Harrison joined Thomas in time to participate in the Battle of Nashville in mid-December, in which Hood's army was routed. Harrison then joined Sherman's Carolinas campaign, where he witnessed Joseph E. Johnston's surrender to Sherman on April 26, 1865. On May 9th, Harrison was commissioned as a brevet brigadier general. And later that month, he's going to participate in the Grand Review of the Armies in Washington, D.C. In June, he and the 70th Indiana were mustered out of service. He writes to his wife that he would refuse a political career, saying, quote, "If my ambition is to soar any more after I come home, you will have to give it wings, for I certainly long only for a life of quiet usefulness at home."
Well, we'll see what now General Harrison does when he gets home, right after these words from our sponsors.
The Dead President's Podcast is brought to you in part by Oz Manley's Oriental Sexual Pills. Oz Manley's Oriental Sexual Pills are a sure, prompt, and positive cure for impotence, loss of manhood, seminal emissions, spermatoria, nervousness, self-distrust, loss of memory, etc. They will make you a strong, vigorous man. Price? $1 per box, or $5 for 6 boxes. Special directions are mailed with each box. Send your correspondence to 2919 Lucas Avenue in St. Louis, Missouri. If you're like most of our listeners, you suffer from chronic and debilitating impotence. Being a sexual cripple has caused a lot of serious problems in your life, and by this point, you've probably given up hope of ever regaining your manhood. That's where Oz Manley's Oriental Sexual Pills come in. These miracle pills are guaranteed to make your manhood hard enough to cut diamonds. Pony up $1 for a box of Oz Manley's Oriental Sexual Pills, and you'll go from half a man to man and a half. That's a message from our sponsor, Oz Manley's Oriental Sexual Pills.
Now a word from our sponsor, Mexican Mustang Liniment, the universal remedy for the ailments of man and beast. It cures in man rheumatism, sciatica, bites, cuts, lumbago, neuralgia, stings, and bruises. It cures in beast foot rot, screwworm, scratches, spavin, hollow horn, shoulder rot, wind galls, and swinny. Mexican Mustang Liniment penetrates the muscles, membranes, and tissues, thereby reaching the seat of disease, which is a property not found in any other liniment. Its use is almost universal by the housewife, the farmer, the stock raiser, and by everyone requiring an effective liniment. All druggists and dealers have it. Listeners, are you sick of having to buy 2 different medicines for yourself and your livestock?
Lord knows I am.
Well, now you don't have to. You and your horses, mules, and cattle can all use Mexican Mustang Liniment. When you have rheumatism and your mare has screwworm, reach for the Mexican Mustang Liniment. When you're suffering from sciatica and your steer comes down with a bad case of hollow horn, you can both take Mexican Mustang liniment. Your days of wasting money on separate medicines are over. That's a message from our sponsor, Mexican Mustang liniment.
We're also proud to be sponsored by Dr. H.B. Butts, who publishes this important announcement. Piles, fistula, ulcers, and all rectal diseases cured. Hemorrhoids of years standing, cured in one painless treatment without knife or ligature. And that's not all. Cancer and all other malignant diseases cured without the use of knife. Consultations free. Call or write Dr. H.B. Butts, 822 Pine Street, St. Louis, Missouri. If you're like most of our listeners, you're constantly suffering from at least one agonizing rectal disease. But you're in luck, because when it comes to rectal diseases, Dr. Butts is the best in the business. In fact, there's not a rectal disease that Dr. Butts can't cure. And best of all, he doesn't use knives. You don't want some quack shoving a scalpel up your ass. You want Dr. Butts, the certified wizard of rectal diseases, whose cures are quick and painless. And rectal diseases aren't all he can handle. Are you dying of cancer? You're in luck, because Dr. Butts can cure cancer too. Get your hemorrhoids and your cancer taken care of in one appointment with the incomparable Dr. Butts. That's a message from our sponsor, Dr. H.B. Butts.
And now, back to the show.
And we're back, and ready to see if Ben Harrison is going to find that life of quiet usefulness at home that he yearns for.
Well, after the war, he is going to decline calls that he run for Congress, and instead he focuses on his law practice. He's going to work himself almost to the point of exhaustion, but within a few years, he will be at the top of the legal profession in Indiana, both in acknowledged skill and in the profitability of his practice.
Turning things around, making that dosh. In 1871, President Grant is going to hire him to represent military commissioners who were being sued for damages after the Supreme Court ruled in Ex parte Milligan that civilians were improperly tried in military tribunals during the Civil War. Harrison is going to argue that the Southern sympathizers who were seeking damages for their treatment had prolonged the war by, quote, holding out aid and comfort to the enemy. Damages are awarded, but only in the amount of $5.
Nice. A newspaper declared that Harrison had, quote, no superior in the bar of Indiana and was the ablest speaker in the state. His law practice grew even more when the Panic of 1873 produced much legal business in the form of bankruptcies and foreclosures. He was able to build a large and upscale new house in downtown Indianapolis, which is still maintained as a historical site and is on our list of places to visit.
It certainly is. In 1872, Harrison is going to throw his hat into the political ring. He's already the Indiana Republican Party's most effective spokesman and most sought-after stump speaker. He places his name in consideration for the Republican gubernatorial nomination. Indiana's wartime governor, Oliver P. Morton, was now a U.S. Senator, and, with President Grant's blessing, controlled patronage appointments throughout the state. Morton kind of sees Harrison as a potential rival. So, Harrison is passed over in favor of a lesser-known candidate who was a close friend of Morton.
Well, he graciously supported the nominee in an effort to unite the party against Democrats, whom he argued would overturn the Union victory in the Civil War and, quote, steal away in the halls of Congress the fruits won from the glistening point of the bayonet.
Oof.
In 1876, he secured the Republican nomination for governor and campaigned in favor of a strong gold-backed dollar and support for civil rights for African Americans, saying, quote, "We entered into an obligation as solemn as our covenant with God to save these people from the dastardly outrages that their rebel masters are committing upon them in the South."
That's it. And Indiana, pretty important swing state where Republicans and Democrats had nearly equal strength. Harrison's going to go on to lose the governor's race by 1.1% to his Democratic opponent, Congressman James Williams. He's also going to campaign hard on behalf of Republican presidential candidate Rutherford B. Hayes, who lost Indiana by 1.2% on his way to winning the presidency by one electoral vote, as you've learned about in our previous Hayes episode.
That's right. Also, as featured in the Hayes episode, in 1877, the Great Railroad Strike swept across the Midwest. At that time, Indiana Republicans were unsatisfied with their Democratic governor's lukewarm and noncommittal response to the strike. Harrison organized a committee of public safety to maintain order, which included a citizen militia that could be used to suppress the strike if necessary. Harrison also served on a committee of arbitration that sought to mediate the dispute, promising that he would assure that railroad workers' grievances were addressed, but also accusing the strikers of, quote, "putting their hands on the throats of commerce and destroying property by stopping the movement of freight."
That's just it. The strike ended, and workers subsequently received increased pay and improved working conditions, but Harrison's aggressive stance created an impression of some that he was not a friend of the working man. In 1878, following Morton's death, Harrison assumed leadership of the Indiana Republican Party and campaigned heavily, intending to run for a Senate seat if Republicans captured the state legislature. They fell just short, but President Hayes acknowledged Harrison's efforts by appointing him to the Mississippi River Commission, which was established to develop improvements to navigation and commerce.
Yep, and a little bit of a wild story happened on the Harrison family side during that same time period. Harrison's father, John Scott Harrison, died in May 1878, and at this time, grave robbery was a major problem.
Ghouls.
Unscrupulous individuals stealing corpses and selling them as cadavers to medical schools that apparently didn't ask too many questions.
That's right.
Now, a family friend's corpse had been stolen the previous week, so just to be safe, the Harrisons hired a man to guard their father's tomb for 30 days. And shortly after the burial, Harrison's younger brother, Carter, with another member of the family friend, his family, they're going to Ohio Medical College in Cincinnati trying to track down this corpse that had been stolen. Carter removes the sheet from an otherwise nude body hanging from a rope in the dissecting room and was shocked to see that it was his own father.
Yeah.
And they were not aware that his body was missing.
Right.
They found out.
Yeah. The body of John Scott Harrison, discovered by his son.
Nude and hanging from the ceiling.
Yeah.
Yep, they learned then that their father's grave was empty, and suspiciously the man hired to guard it was nowhere to be found, and could not be found.
Yeah,
Potential suspect.
Carter Harrison was reported to be almost prostrate from nervous shock. Benjamin Harrison had been scheduled to give the keynote address at the Indiana Republican Convention, and instead rushed to Ohio to investigate the incident, though he made it back just in time to give a rousing convention speech. How he was able to make a great speech out of it under those circumstances, boy.
It's probably like that Brett Favre game right after his dad died.
Yeah.
Well, moving on to 1880, Benjamin Harrison will be leading Indiana's delegation to the Republican National Convention, where he's actually going to receive one vote on the third ballot for the presidential nomination. The Indiana delegation initially supporting James G. Blaine, but the convention deadlocked between Blaine and former President Ulysses Grant going for a third term. Harrison is going to approach Ohio Representative James A. Garfield and ask him to let himself be considered.
That's just it. Garfield is going to decline, but the next day, after Garfield receives 17 votes on the 34th ballot, Indiana switches to Garfield on the 35th ballot, triggering a cascade that secured Garfield's nomination on the 36th ballot. When Garfield won the presidency that fall, he considered Harrison for a cabinet appointment. However, Republicans had finally captured the Indiana legislature, and Harrison preferred to join the U.S. Senate. Walter Q. Gresham, a federal judge who was Harrison's only rival for leadership of Indiana's Republican Party, withdrew himself from consideration, and Harrison is easily elected.
Nice. Well, now Harrison is going to the Senate, where he is going to be fielding many patronage requests from Indiana office seekers, and he's going to support the Pendleton Civil Service Act, although he will successfully argue that federal employees should still be allowed to make voluntary campaign contributions. And another issue of the time, with the federal government running a huge budget surplus, Democrats want to cut tariffs, but Harrison believed that high protectionist tariffs were necessary to protect American industry. He argued that lowering tariffs would mean, quote, less work and lower wages for American workers.
That's it.
It's going to be a big issue in his career going forward.
Absolutely. He favors using the budget surplus to fund increased pensions for Civil War veterans, but a pension bill that passed the Senate was defeated in the Democrat-controlled House. Harrison supported federal funding for education and sponsored an amendment that would make states ineligible for federal funds unless they provided free education to all, regardless of race.
Well, that bill will pass the Senate, but it's going to be defeated in the Democratic House.
That's it.
Harrison is going to break with his fellow Republicans and vote against the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, arguing that it restricted immigration more than was authorized by the United States treaty with China, although that will pass anyway.
That's it.
And then Harrison is going to attend the 1884 Republican National Convention, and he is going to seek to position himself as a potential compromise candidate in the event of a deadlocked convention.
Right. However, Harrison's Indiana rival, Walter Gresham, who had become Postmaster General and taken control of Indiana patronage, had the same idea, and he is going to block Harrison's efforts to have the Indiana delegation place his name in nomination. There ended up being no deadlock, and Harrison is going to campaign aggressively for the Republican nominee, James G. Blaine. He even went on to file a libel suit on Blaine's behalf to combat the scurrilous rumor that Blaine and his wife had not been married when their first child was born.
Well, despite all those efforts, Blaine is going to lose the election to the reform-minded New York governor, Grover Cleveland, who won the swing state of Indiana by 1.3%.
That's it.
And President Cleveland is going to go on to shatter the record for vetoes, particularly vetoing a host of private pension bills. Harrison supported private pension bills, sponsored a lot of them himself, and also supported a general pension bill that Cleveland also vetoed.
Yeah. Harrison is going to refer to Cleveland's vetoes as, quote, tipped with poisoned arrows. He's going to criticize the president's lack of largesse with veterans and made a well-publicized speech in the Senate against Cleveland's replacement of a Republican postmaster in Cannelton, Indiana, with a Democrat. Now, this postmaster was technically a postmistress. She's the widow of a Union veteran, and Harrison used her dismissal to question Cleveland's commitment to civil service reform.
Well, that was Cleveland's big selling point coming in.
That's it.
Harrison is going to further clash with Democrats in his capacity as chairman of the Senate Committee on Territories when House Democrats twice block the passage of a bill to make South Dakota a state, allegedly on partisan grounds, as South Dakota leaned Republican. And Harrison is coming up on the end of his 6-year term in the Senate, and he is up for re-election in 1886. However, the previous year, Democrats had captured the Indiana state legislature and used their power to reapportion the state, allegedly gerrymandering it against Republicans.
That's right. Harrison is going to campaign hard in favor of the Republican ticket, and even though Republicans received 10,000 more overall votes than Democrats and won statewide elections, the gerrymander enabled Democrats to retain a slight plurality in the state legislature. After weeks of deadlock, Democrat David Turpie was chosen by a one-vote majority to replace Harrison in the Senate.
Ouch.
Yeah. However, Harrison's conduct in the Republican statewide victory impressed his national party leaders, with one Kansas senator saying that it, quote, puts you in the line of presidential promotion.
Nice. Well, speaking of presidential promotion, we're coming up to the 1888 Republican National Convention.
That's it.
And once again, we've got James G. Blaine, who was the party's 1884 nominee. He had remained the front-runner in the eyes of many Republicans heading into 1888, especially after he made a well-publicized defense of protectionist tariffs in response to President Cleveland's loud call for tariff cuts. However, when Blaine indicated that he did not want his name to be considered at the convention, the field was wide open.
That's just it. Some of Harrison's political allies are going to orchestrate a quiet campaign to stoke enthusiasm for him in newspapers and among potential delegates, especially pointing out that no man was better suited to carry the critical swing state of Indiana. As we've seen, Indiana hopping back and forth here.
Harrison supporters also outmaneuvered Walter Gresham to secure the loyalty of Indiana's convention delegation. And when the convention opened in Chicago, many Blaine supporters were holding out hope that Blaine could be drafted as the nominee of a deadlocked convention, while Harrison's team believed that Harrison was the preferred second choice of many Blaine men.
That's it. First ballot, 14 men received votes, with Ohio Senator John Sherman at the top with 229, Ben Harrison fourth place with 85. Then you have little movement on the second and third ballots, but on the fourth ballot, Harrison bumps up to second place with 216 votes, including most of the New York delegation. Behind-the-scenes machinations are going to continue through two more ballots, with Sherman believing the New York delegation was about to switch its support to him, and Blaine supporters believing the convention was on the verge of turning to Blaine.
However, Blaine sent another unequivocal message that he did not want the nomination, and Harrison's team held on to New York's support. He moved ahead of Sherman on the seventh ballot, sparking a landslide in his favor that enabled him to clinch the nomination on the eighth ballot.
That's right. It looks like it's going to be Ben Harrison, and as his vice presidential running mate, the convention chose New York financier Levi Morton, former congressman and minister to France.
That's the Republican team, and they're going up against who? Well, the Democratic Convention is going to unanimously renominate President Grover Cleveland.
That's right.
And they're going to choose Ohio Senator Alan Thurman as his running mate. So our listeners will recall Vice President Thomas Hendricks died in office in 1885. So we got a new Democratic ticket.
Indeed we do.
An incumbent Democratic president running for re-election for the first time since 1840?
It's been quite a while.
Yeah, when that incumbent Democratic president lost to a Harrison.
That's right.
Interesting.
Most interesting. Now, of course, Cleveland is not going to personally campaign, and he bars his cabinet officers from doing so, leaving his campaign to surrogates led by Thurman. Harrison conducts a front porch campaign, receiving delegations of supporters and giving over 90 speeches from his home in Indianapolis that were published in newspapers. The campaign's major issue was tariffs, and Cleveland had devoted his entire 1887 State of the Union address to his call to lower tariffs, arguing that high tariffs raised prices for consumers and, in light of the large budget surplus, constituted unnecessary and therefore unjust taxation.
On the other hand, Republicans argued that high tariffs were necessary to protect American industry from foreign competitors and would guarantee high profits and high wages for American workers, while lowering tariffs would result in lower wages and lost jobs. Harrison's campaign went to great lengths to portray him as a friend of the working man, including in the official campaign biography written by his friend Lew Wallace, author of Ben-Hur.
That's right, Civil War General Lew Wallace, author of Ben-Hur, penning Ben Harrison's campaign biography.
Nice. Harrison's support for the veterans' pensions that Cleveland had vetoed helped him gain support among veterans, and it also didn't hurt that he was a veteran himself while Cleveland had avoided military service by paying for a substitute.
Yeah?
Harrison's campaign also going to receive a boost from the so-called Murchison letter, which was a letter sent to the British ambassador by a California Republican posing as a British immigrant and asking which candidate would better serve British interests.
Yeah.
The ambassador foolishly replied that Cleveland was probably the better candidate from a British perspective. Republicans then published this letter everywhere and used it to portray Cleveland as being in the pocket of British interests. Britain, of course, favoring free trade and potentially a beneficiary of lowering tariffs, as Cleveland wants to do.
Yeah. This letter is going to particularly hurt Cleveland among Irish immigrant voters who were fiercely anti-British. A few days before the election, Democrats fight back by publishing a letter written by William Dudley, an Indianapolis lawyer whom Harrison had chosen to be treasurer of the Republican National Committee. Dudley's letter advised Indiana campaign chairmen to have money ready to buy the votes of any floaters willing to sell their votes. To be fair, a similar letter encouraging vote buying written by an Indiana Democrat was also published. Harrison not going to comment on the controversy in the final days of the campaign, but after the election, he never speaks to Dudley again.
Ouch. Well, when all the votes were counted, Cleveland beat Harrison in the popular vote by more than 90,000.
But
Harrison eked out narrow victories in the critical swing states of New York and Indiana, giving him an electoral college victory of 233 to 168.
that's right. Despite losing the popular vote, Ben Harrison is going to be our next president. Now, Democrats are going to accuse Republicans of engaging in widespread fraud in New York and Indiana. After Pennsylvania machine boss Matthew Quay was snubbed for a cabinet post, he remarked that Harrison would never know, quote, how close a number of men were compelled to approach the penitentiary to make him president.
Some historians have considered the 1888 election among the most corrupt in American history, but others have argued that there is no evidence to show that it was more corrupt than other elections of its era.
That's it. I mean, it's a pretty dirty time.
Oh, yeah. There were allegations of major fraud in the elections of 1876, 1880, 1884.
That's right, and our listeners are going to remember how in 1880, then Vice President-elect Chester Arthur bragged that Indiana had been carried by soap, slang for purchased votes.
Yeah, and as to the popular vote, we should not fail to mention that Cleveland's popular vote victory was being made possible by huge Democratic majorities in southern states where widespread intimidation and suppression prevented most African Americans from voting.
And from the financial support of viewers like you. In addition to Harrison's victory, Republicans also capture a majority in both houses of Congress. It's a red wave. Harrison writes that he felt, quote, more oppressed than elated by the prospect of assuming the presidency.
Well,
but it looks like the cards are in his favor. He's got Republican control of Congress.
that's right. Our boy Benjamin Harrison going to assume the presidency right after these words from our sponsors. The Dead Presidents Podcast is brought to you in part by John S. Lowe Bottling Works. Beer, beer, beer. The beer business of the late John S. Lowe's estate will be conducted actively by John S. Lowe Jr. All orders sent to John S. Lowe Bottling Works will receive prompt attention. Listeners, if you thought John S. Lowe's tragic death would interrupt the endless river of beer flowing out of John S. Lowe Bottling Works, think again. John S. Lowe Jr. is mourning his father the only way he knows how, by supplying you with copious amounts of delicious beer on demand. That's right, at John S. Lowe Bottling Works, not even death can stop the beer. That's a message from our sponsor, John S. Lowe Bottling Works.
Now, an important message from our sponsor, Joseph Fleming & Son, wholesale and retail druggists. Invalids and all persons suffering from nervous prostration who desire to use an absolutely pure stimulant would consult their own interest by giving the pure 8-year-old Export Whiskey one trial. Export Whiskey is the most perfect whiskey ever placed on the market. Its success has been without precedent and far beyond our most sanguine expectations. We guard its quality with the most jealous care. No other whiskey can approach it in excellence. Neatly put up in full quarts, available for $1 each or $10 per dozen, sold only by Joseph Fleming & Son, druggists. Listeners, are you suffering from invalidism or nervous prostration? Prostrate yourself before Export Whiskey. Joseph Fleming & Son are actual, legitimate druggists, and their professional recommendation for you, as an invalid, is that you immediately purchase a dozen quarts of high-quality whiskey. You do that, and we guarantee your invalidism won't be a problem anymore. You'll feel so good, your able-bodied friends will start wishing they were invalids, just so they could be treated by Export Whiskey, the purest and most perfect stimulant known to man.
I thought alcohol was a depressant, but I'm no druggist.
That's right, and this is a message from our sponsor, Joseph Fleming & Son, druggists.
And we're proud to be sponsored by Dr. Haynes's Golden Specific. Drunkenness, or the liquor habit, is positively cured by administering Dr. Haynes's Golden Specific. It can be given in a cup of coffee or tea, or in articles of food without the knowledge of the person taking it. It is absolutely harmless and will effect a permanent and speedy cure whether the patient is a moderate drinker or an alcoholic wreck. It never fails. It operates so quietly and with such certainty that the patient undergoes no inconvenience, and ere he is aware, his complete reformation is effected. A complete cure is guaranteed in every instance. Send your correspondence to the Golden Specific Company at 185 Race Street in Cincinnati. In all the world, there is but one cure, and that cure is Dr. Haynes's Golden Specific. Listeners, are you looking to break a deep-seated, life-destroying drinking problem with absolutely no effort whatsoever on your part? Well, you're in luck. Just slip a little Dr. Haynes's Golden Specific in your coffee, and boom, you're no longer an alcoholic wreck. It's literally that easy. What specifically is in this magical specific? Well, Dr. Haynes isn't specific about his specific, but you can rest assured that it's quite scientific. In fact, I've tried it myself, and I say it's terrific. That's a message from our sponsor, Dr. Haynes's Golden Specific.
And now, back to the show. And we're back, ready to dive headfirst into the presidency of Benjamin Harrison. Now, this is the centennial election. 100 years since Washington.
That's
Now
right.
we have Ben Harrison.
The centennial president. But not the first President Harrison.
No, indeed.
And we'll recall the pneumonia that killed William Henry Harrison may have had its origins in the 2-hour inaugural address he delivered without a hat or overcoat on a cold and rainy day. And then, on March 4th, 1889, his grandson was also confronted with another extremely rainy inauguration day. But Benjamin Harrison would not make the same mistake. He spoke for half as long, wore leather undergarments to keep himself dry, and benefited from outgoing President Cleveland graciously holding an umbrella over his head.
That's it. He spoke in favor of protective tariffs, a stronger Navy, the Monroe Doctrine, civil service reform, voting rights in the South, and received a big round of applause when he called for pensions for Civil War veterans and their families. He closed by saying, quote, "God has placed upon our head a diadem, and has laid at our feet power and wealth beyond definition or calculation. But we must not forget that we take these gifts upon the condition that justice and mercy shall hold the reins of power, and that the upward avenues of hope shall be free to all the people."
Nice.
That's it. Some fair words from our centennial president.
That's
That's going to
right.
bring us to cabinet appointments.
Yep, Harrison is going to appoint a pretty well-balanced cabinet of able men who lack big national reputations, with the notable exception of Secretary of State James G. Blaine.
James G. Blaine returning
That's right.
to his Secretary of State position.
Served under President Garfield and briefly under President Arthur. And now Harrison had long been a Blaine supporter, and he admired Blaine's great political talent, but their relationship is going to become somewhat strained. Blaine felt that Harrison owed the presidency to his support, and that he, rather than Harrison, deserved to be president.
Oof.
And he was especially miffed when Harrison declined to name his son Walker Blaine as First Assistant Secretary of State, and instead gave Walker a lesser post in the State Department.
Yeah. And during Blaine's frequent long absences from office due to poor health, Harrison does much of the secretary's work himself and begins to suspect that Blaine's pleas of poor health included a healthy dose of laziness. Harrison is determined not to suffer the fate of President Grant, whose reputation was tarred with the corruption of his appointees. Harrison is going to keep party bosses out of his cabinet and insist on investigating the qualifications of lower-level appointees rather than simply taking the word of the congressman who recommended them. His conduct on appointments is going to offend some party bosses, such as the aforementioned Matthew Quay of Pennsylvania, James Clarkson of Iowa, and the aforementioned Thomas Platt of New York, who felt that he had been promised the post of Treasury Secretary at the Republican convention.
Well, Harrison didn't see it that way, and despite Harrison's commitment to honest merit, the unrelenting push of Republican congressmen demanding jobs for their friends and supporters eventually led him to replace many Cleveland Democrats with members of his own party. He spent hours each day addressing patronage matters and wrote that office seekers made him feel, quote, like a hunted animal.
Not a great feeling.
No. And though he appointed notable reformer Theodore Roosevelt to the Civil Service Commission, Harrison did not win admiration from civil service reformers, who gave him little credit for his stand against machine bosses. His attempt to steer a middle course thus alienated both reformers and machine bosses, which would have a major effect on the 1892 election.
That's it. Well, it's time for certain change. We got some new states coming into the Union. As a matter of fact, a half dozen new states being admitted to the Union during the Ben Harrison presidency. That's more than any other president. You get North and South Dakota, Montana, and Washington admitted in November 1889. Idaho and Wyoming admitted in July 1890. Now, these western states lean Republican, and each and every one of them elect all Republicans to represent them in Congress. The new states gave Republicans a large majority in the Senate and added a slight cushion to their razor-thin House majority. However, Westerners often had differing views from Easterners, particularly on issues like tariffs and silver coinage, which is going to complicate Harrison's efforts to maintain party unity.
Yeah, we're going to hear about that. Meanwhile, Harrison supported legislation to expand veterans' pensions, but right off the bat, before Congress reconvenes in December 1889, he's going to seek to increase pensions under existing law and appointed zealous veterans advocate James Tanner as commissioner of the Pension Bureau. However, Tanner turned out to be a little too overzealous. When an investigation by the Interior Secretary revealed that Tanner was making illegal pension payouts, Harrison was forced to demand his resignation.
Ouch.
Then in 1890, Congress passed and Harrison signed the Dependent and Disability Pension Act, which provided pensions to all disabled veterans and their families, even if their disabilities were not the result of military service.
That's right. It is going to nearly double the number of veterans receiving pensions, and the amount paid out by the government is going to increase from 89 million in 1889 to 160 million by 1893, constituting almost 40% of the federal budget. It has been called the, quote, largest single appropriation ever made for a government expenditure up to that time. Now, a previous version of the act had been vetoed by President Cleveland, who, of course, objected to its huge cost.
Well, Harrison got it through.
That's it, and of course that's going to lead to some young women saddling on up to military veterans.
Yeah, another boon to old veterans. Can get a young wife who's looking to cash in on your pension after you die.
That's it. But let's look elsewhere. Let's look on the international stage.
That's right. When Harrison took office, he inherited a little crisis in the Pacific island archipelago of Samoa. A treaty committed the U.S. to ensuring Samoa's independence in exchange for the right to use a major Samoan port, but an aggressively imperial Germany had threatened an invasion of Samoa after some Germans were killed in a Samoan rebellion. You'll recall President Cleveland secured Germany's agreement to seek a diplomatic solution, and President Harrison and Secretary of State Blaine are going to send diplomats to Germany with instructions to preserve Samoan independence and protect American interests. The conference resulted in a joint protectorate over Samoa to be administered by the United States, Germany, and Britain. That agreement notable as a first instance of the U.S. dipping its toe in the imperialist pond, which would become an increasing trend in the coming years.
Indeed it would. How about Latin America? Harrison and Blaine are going to send delegates to a Pan-American conference seeking increased cooperation and trade in the Western Hemisphere. And this is going to be something that Ben Harrison is going to consider important enough to mention for posterity, as we'll discuss later. However, many Latin American countries, they're suspicious of expanding American influence, and the conference rejects a proposal for a hemisphere-wide customs union, and instead merely recommends that countries negotiate bilateral trade agreements.
Well, Harrison's going to take that up a little later. First, we're going to talk about antitrust legislation. In 1888, both party platforms had condemned the growing problem of monopolistic trusts. Harrison criticized trust by saying, quote, "When organized as they often are to crush out all healthy competition and to monopolize the production or sale of an article of commerce and general necessity, they are dangerous conspiracies against the public good and should be made the subject of prohibitory and even penal legislation."
That's right. You got Senator John Sherman of Ohio introducing a bill prohibiting and penalizing monopolies and anti-competitive agreements. The Sherman Antitrust Act was passed by Congress with almost unanimous support. Harrison's Justice Department brought 7 lawsuits for violations of the act, but it would reach its full potential only when aggressively enforced by President Theodore Roosevelt. And that is going to bring us to silver and gold, silver and gold.
A big issue.
Indeed.
The Grant administration had eliminated the coinage of silver dollars and reestablished the gold standard, and the Hayes administration made sure that even greenback paper currency was redeemable in gold. Proponents of the gold standard argued that silver coinage would cause inflation and weaken the dollar. A silver dollar contained only 72 cents worth of silver. But silver advocates wanted an expanded money supply that would curb deflation and relieve debtors. The Bland-Allison Act that was passed over Hayes's veto required the government to purchase at least $2 million of silver per year. During the Cleveland administration, efforts to increase silver coinage were defeated, but those efforts were renewed during the Harrison administration. Harrison favored the gold standard, but he hoped to reach a compromise that would expand silver coinage without jeopardizing gold.
That's it. Western farmers, a key constituency of the Republican Party, were strongly pro-silver, and Westerners had a much more powerful voice in Congress after the 6 new Western states were admitted to the Union. Harrison's going to be working overtime to secure congressional support, and he threatens to veto any bill that provided for free coinage of silver. With his support, the House passes a bill that would increase silver coinage, but enable the Treasury to purchase silver with special Treasury notes that were redeemable in gold, thus tethering the value of silver to the gold standard. The Senate is going to reject that bill and pass a different one with the support of Western Republicans that provided for free coinage of silver. In a conference committee of both houses, Senator John Sherman engineered a compromise that required the Treasury to purchase 4.5 million ounces of silver per year, gave the Treasury Secretary discretion to redeem silver certificates in silver or gold, and stated that it was the government's policy to maintain the two metals on parity with each other.
The compromise, known as the Sherman Silver Purchase Act, passed both houses on party line votes, with all of the Western Republicans on board. In the years that followed, so many silver certificates were redeemed in gold that the government's gold reserve was depleted, contributing to the Panic of 1893. Under Harrison's successor, gold payments were suspended, the price of silver plummeted, and the Sherman Silver Purchase Act was repealed.
That's it.
That'll be a subject for episode 24.
Indeed. And that's going to bring us over to tariffs. Harrison argued that tariff rates, quote, necessarily have relation to other things besides public revenues, They have a direct relation to home production, to work, to wages, and to the commercial independence of our country, and the wise and patriotic legislator should enlarge his field of vision to include all of these.
One such wise and patriotic legislator was Representative William McKinley, chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee. He agreed with Harrison's position and led the charge on tariff reform. His committee held weeks of hearings and carefully reviewed tariff rates on a wide range of commodities, and he proposed a revised tariff bill that would increase rates on many items. Support for high tariffs was mostly concentrated in the Northeast, where most of the nation's industry and manufacturing was concentrated.
That's it, and again, Western farmers weighing in, and they're not crazy about high tariffs. But McKinley and Harrison seek their support by imposing tariff duties on many agricultural products that had previously been duty-free, thus protecting American farmers from competitors in Canada and Mexico. They also propose to allow sugar, molasses, and coffee to enter the country duty-free. Sugar duties generated more revenue than any other commodity, and making it duty-free was very popular among a wide range of consumers. I know I, for one, prefer my coffee duty-free.
That's right. Not as popular, though, among Secretary of State James G. Blaine, who protested on the ground that free sugar would jeopardize the nation's bargaining leverage in trying to negotiate trade reciprocity agreements with Latin American countries.
Yep, James G. Blaine likes duty in his sugar.
Well, in response to his criticisms, an amendment was added that empowered the president to reimpose duties on sugar and other commodities imported from nations that did not offer reciprocal benefits to the United States. And with that included the McKinley tariff, passed Congress without Democratic support. It's going to raise average tariff rates by almost 50%, but by making sugar and some other commodities duty-free, it had the net effect of lowering tariff revenue by 4%.
That's it. And that's going to bring us to reciprocity agreements. Harrison assigns the task of negotiating trade reciprocity agreements with foreign nations to Republican diplomat John W. Foster, grandfather of future Secretary of State John Foster Dulles and future CIA Director Allen Dulles. 10 such agreements were reached during his administration, including with Germany, Austria-Hungary, and 7 Latin American nations. The U.S. deliberately avoided granting trade reciprocity to Canada because it believed that Canada's agricultural produce would compete with American farmers, but that Canada would continue to buy manufactured goods from Britain rather than the U.S.
Too bad, Canada. Go complain to the Queen.
That's just it.
Is Queen Victoria still alive at this time?
Oh, yeah.
Well, the Harrison administration is going to continue the policy of modernizing the U.S. Navy that was begun under Presidents Arthur and Cleveland. Congress authorizes many new vessels, including 3 battleships that are larger than any in the Navy's history. During Harrison's tenure, 25 new naval vessels are going to be launched. Congress will also pass a postal subsidy law whereby it will pay private steamship lines to carry overseas mail, and that is going to prompt the construction of many high-quality vessels that could serve as a Navy reserve if necessary.
All this going to become more and more important as we continue in our series.
Right?
That's going to bring us to conservation. Harrison signed into law the Forest Reserve Act, which authorized the president to set aside government-owned land as forest reserves. Harrison designated 13 million acres as forest reserves, which would later be known as national forests.
Speaking of government-owned land,
yeah. Now
we're going to
talk about the dark times.
Harrison's policy towards Native Americans consisted primarily in implementing the Dawes Act that had been passed during the Cleveland administration, which called for individual Indians to receive allotments of land rather than the federal government holding tribal land collectively in trust for the tribe. Harrison among those who naively hoped the allotments would enable Indians to become self-sufficient farmers, but as we mentioned last time, by the time the Dawes Act would be repealed in 1934, Indians lost most of their land to white speculators.
That's it. Harrison also expanded the application of the Pendleton Civil Service Act to apply to many Indian agency appointments. In 1890, the ghost dance movement spread among Indians on western reservations. It was a religious ceremony calling for the return of Indian ancestors and buffalo herds, but many whites feared it was a hostile call for war. On the Standing Rock Reservation, the federal Indian agents sought to arrest Sitting Bull for suspected involvement in the movement. On December 15, 1890, he was shot and killed by Native American police officers trying to take him into custody. And fortunately, he didn't live to see this next event.
That's right, on December 29th,
A dark day.
fears of the ghost dance movement were behind a U.S. Army regiment's botched attempt to disarm a camp of Lakota Sioux at Wounded Knee Creek in South Dakota. A firefight broke out, resulting in the deaths of 31 soldiers and about 200 Indians, including many women and children.
That's just it.
Harrison demanded an investigation, saying that, quote, if there was any unsoldierly conduct, you will relieve the responsible officer and so use the troops engaged there as to avoid its repetition. Colonel James Forsyth was suspended pending the investigation, but the Army's inquiry cleared him of wrongdoing, and he was reinstated.
Typical. The Battle of Wounded Knee, also known as the Wounded Knee Massacre, which it was. That's considered the last major battle in the centuries-long conflict between whites and Native Americans. Incredibly sad chapter in American history.
Mm-hmm.
And that's going to bring us to something no less sad, the advance of civil rights.
Something where maybe Benjamin Harrison can maybe hold his head a little higher.
Yeah.
Because he was pressing Congress to pass legislation to protect African Americans' right to vote in southern states. He said, quote, when and under what conditions is the black man to have a free ballot? When is he, in fact, to have those full civil rights which have so long been his in law? When is that equality of influence which our form of government was intended to secure to electors to be restored? This generation should courageously face these grave questions and not leave them as a heritage of woe to the next.
A fine sentiment. You have Massachusetts Representative Henry Cabot Lodge sponsoring a bill that would enable federal election supervisors to file their own returns of vote totals, in addition to those filed by state officials, and give federal officials power to declare election winners, taking that power away from state governors. Democrats vehemently oppose this bill, decrying it as a return to Reconstruction and the use of federal force against the South. One Georgia congressman goes as far as to declare that Southern whites would not submit to being, quote, overridden and downtrodden by a race whom God never intended should rule over us.
Yikes.
Yeah. The Lodge bill is going to narrowly pass the House on a party line vote, but Senate Democrats filibuster the bill and repeatedly obstruct it from coming to a vote.
In September 1890, Senate Republicans agreed to delay a vote to the next session in return for bringing the McKinley tariff to a final vote. In the next session, however, pro-silver advocates made a renewed push for a free silver coinage bill, and a few Western Republicans obtained Democratic support by backing their filibuster of the Lodge Bill, successfully delaying it until the following session when the midterm elections would drastically change the composition of Congress.
That's it.
Harrison had fought hard to get the bill passed, with one Republican congressman saying, quote, "He feels deeply the humiliation, and I believe he would rather die trying to protect the rights of American citizens than to live and not make the effort."
Right. And that's going to bring us to the 1890 midterm elections. In Harrison's first 2 years, the Republican-controlled Congress was more active than any in recent memory. In the midterm elections of 1890, Democrats portrayed the Republican Congress as too active, denouncing it as the, quote, billion-dollar Congress that spent an unprecedented amount of money. They decried the McKinley Tariff and stoked Southern fear over the Lodge Election Security Bill. Also, significant local issues, including increasing Republican support for alcohol prohibition and, in some states, English-only education laws, alienate some voters. The result? A bloodbath at the polls. Republicans are going to lose 93 House seats, and their narrow majority was converted into a huge Democratic majority. Republicans are also going to lose some Senate seats, but they're going to hold on to a small majority.
Ouch.
Yep, not the result that President Harrison was hoping for.
No,
Sir.
And it's going to have major consequences for the rest of his presidency, because
Absolutely.
after, the most active Congress in years, he is going to have very few legislative accomplishments with the new Democratic House in place. He's going to try to renew his push for civil rights in Southern elections by proposing a bipartisan commission to investigate the issue, but that proposal went nowhere in the Democratic House. He also condemned lynching, saying that lynchings, quote, shame our Christian civilization, and he urged Congress to enact, quote, the strongest repressive legislation possible. Frederick Douglass said, quote, to my mind, we never had a greater president. And he also said Harrison's efforts should endear him to the colored people as long as he lives.
Pretty interesting. Benjamin Harrison may be trying to fulfill similar things that James A. Garfield had spoken out about. Maybe had Garfield lived, he would have been saying the same kind of things. Mm-hmm. And more likely than not, it would have ended up with the same result.
Well, let's go abroad. Can't do much in Congress, but the president is still the chief diplomat.
That's it. Let's look at the Central American Canal. Harrison pursued the nation's long-standing goal of constructing a canal across Central America. Congress had granted a charter to a private company to build a canal in Nicaragua, and Harrison urged Congress to appropriate money from the Treasury to finance the project, or to guarantee the company's bonds. But his ideas faced bipartisan opposition, and it would never even come to a vote.
Well, the long-held canal dream will be deferred to another day and another president. But, well, with the expansion of the U.S. Navy underway, as we mentioned, Harrison is going to seek to secure new locations for naval bases and refueling stations in the Western Hemisphere. One potential location was Haiti, where you got Frederick Douglass, whom Harrison had named U.S. Minister to Haiti. Douglass is going to seek to negotiate an agreement that would not spark outrage and unrest among the Haitian people, a delicate matter.
Indeed.
And the Navy Secretary, Benjamin Tracy, is going to become frustrated with what he sees as Douglass's lack of progress, and Harrison will agree to send a Navy admiral to assist as a special commissioner.
Yeah. Now, this doesn't work out, because the Haitians view the appearance of naval vessels as an attempt to intimidate them, and now they're going to refuse to make a deal. Harrison then seeks to lease Samana Bay from the Dominican Republic, but talks fall through after the Dominicans were able to obtain refinancing of their debt and no longer needed the money. Harrison is going to reject suggestions to seek naval bases in Portugal or Africa, arguing that it was unlikely that the Navy would need bases outside of the Western Hemisphere.
Harrison, not really too aggressive of an imperialist. It's not his bag.
No, it doesn't seem to be. That's going to bring us to Chile.
Yeah, Harrison not going to take any crap from other countries, though. In Chile, in 1891, some American sailors on shore leave were involved in a violent brawl with Chileans that left 2 Americans dead. Chile tried to pass it off as a drunken barroom incident, but the Navy's investigation concluded that Chilean police officers had bayoneted unarmed Americans. Chile issued a non-apology, which Harrison considered insulting. The Navy prepared for war, and Harrison demanded that Chile pay reparations and issue a real apology. Chile caved to his demands, retracting its earlier statements and paying the requested reparations.
Nice. And avoiding a skirmish there. And that's going to bring us to a dear old former mother country, Great Britain. The Harrison administration became embroiled with Britain and Canada over the right to hunt seals off the coast of Alaska. U.S. law limited the practice, but Britain denied that the U.S. could regulate hunting in international waters, and even though the seals made their home on U.S. land. The parties are going to agree to suspend the hunting while the dispute is sent into international arbitration, but when Britain refuses to extend the suspension while the arbitration is still pending, Harrison says it will be treated as a matter of honor, implying that the U.S. would risk war to protect the rights of its seals. Britain caves, and they agree to extend the suspension. After Harrison leaves office, the arbitration decided against the U.S. position.
Ouch. I guess they are American seals when they're on land, but when they swim out into international waters, they're fair game. Unfortunately.
Yep.
Well, we're coming down to the end of Harrison's 4 years, and it's time for him to seek re-election.
That's it. The 1892 Republican Convention is coming up.
Well,
and you got some Republican Party bosses, especially Matthew Quay and Thomas Platt, seeking an alternative to renominating Ben Harrison.
they're going to turn to the only figure in the party who has the stature to rival the sitting president, and that's James G. Blaine, the sitting Secretary of State. In some behind-the-scenes meetings, Blaine indicated that he would not be an open candidate, but would accept the nomination if the convention offered it to him. When Harrison got wind of the scheme to promote Blaine, his surrogates began organizing support for his renomination. After an effort to pack the Indiana State Republican Committee with Blaine supporters failed, Blaine published a letter stating that he would not be a candidate. But he did not endorse Harrison.
That's right. A few months later, Blaine was in New York secretly meeting with Thomas Platt, and 3 days before the Republican convention opened in Minneapolis, he submitted his resignation from the State Department. At the convention, some anti-Harrison men felt Blaine's actions would appear treacherous, and, seeking another alternative, coalesced around new Ohio Governor William McKinley. However, Harrison's team had his supporters well organized, and he won the nomination on the first ballot, receiving 535 votes against 182 for Blaine and 182 for McKinley. All but one of Ohio's delegates voted for McKinley. It was McKinley himself who voted for Harrison. But Harrison sees this as a cynical pretense, and he never forgives McKinley for it.
Ouch. Then you got Vice President Levi Morton, who was a little too friendly with Blaine supporters. He's going to be dropped from the ticket. And the vice presidential nomination is going to go to Ohio's Whitelaw Reid, a journalist and historian who was serving as U.S. Minister to France. Now, Harrison's got a little problem here. You think an incumbent president would sail to renomination, but he had more than 40% of the convention vote going to other candidates.
That's it.
So he's got to work to reunite the party behind him, because across the aisle there, Democrats are uniting behind their nominee, ex-President Grover Cleveland, who's running for an unprecedented, non-consecutive second term.
That's right. The presidential election of 1892, the rematch. Ben Harrison travels to New York, where he promised Thomas Platt, quote, no penalties or personal ill will over the convention as long as he worked to support the ticket, which Platt promised to do. Harrison had to replace the highly experienced Iowa party boss James Clarkson as chairman of the Republican National Committee after Clarkson failed to support him at the convention. He also named John W. Foster to replace Blaine as Secretary of State. Throughout the fall, events intervened that made Harrison's campaign pretty difficult.
Yeah, he's not going to have a smooth road to Election Day. First, you got a cholera outbreak, forcing him to cancel a planned speaking tour and return to Washington, where he orders a 20-day quarantine on ships entering the United States, an action that's not going to do him any favors with immigrant voters.
No.
And you got a series of labor strikes throughout the country, which are going to be undermining his efforts to argue that the McKinley tariff had increased wages. That's going to include the deadly Homestead strike against the Carnegie Steel Corporation.
Yeah.
Where Harrison tried to encourage Henry Clay Frick to settle, and Frick refused, and Harrison kind of ended up being both sides of that kind of strike not looking favorably on him.
Right. And then you got those pro-silver farmers. They have a movement, and they nominate James B. Weaver for president on the Populist Party ticket. And in many western states, the Democratic Party supports this ticket in order to block Republicans. The worst blow to Harrison, however, is the rapidly declining health of First Lady Caroline Harrison. In April, she was stricken with a serious respiratory ailment, and Harrison took her to the Adirondacks to convalesce. Her condition, however, worsened, and after Congress adjourned on August 5th, he stayed at her side, unable to give campaign speeches or receive delegations as he had done so effectively in 1888. In September, Caroline was diagnosed with tuberculosis. That pesky old TB.
She returned to the White House, where she died on October 25th, the second First Lady to die in office. First, of course, being Letitia Tyler.
That's right.
Devastated and emotionally drained, Harrison spent the remaining weeks of the campaign in mourning.
Well, surely he'll get some sympathy votes.
Well, on Election Day, he's going to be decisively defeated.
That's just it. He's going to end up with 43% of the popular vote and 145 electoral votes. Cleveland, 46% and 277 electoral votes, including those of swing states New York and Indiana, as well as usually Republican-leaning Illinois and Wisconsin. James B. Weaver's populist ticket is going to garner 8.5% of the popular vote and actually carries 5 western states for a total of 22 electoral votes.
Well, Harrison was personally fine with being relieved of the heavy burden of office, but he was disappointed that the voters had not vindicated his term. He was most chagrined that workers had not been on board with protective tariffs, saying, quote, "The working man declined to walk under the protective umbrella because it sheltered his employer also. He has smashed it for the fun of seeing the silk stockings take rain."
Well, I guess that's it. Harrison's gonna gloomily wait to be out of the White House. Or is he? Harrison's final months in office are going to bring one last crisis/opportunity, when the Queen of Hawaii seeks to impose a new constitution and make herself an absolute monarch. The kingdom's business class, mostly of American descent, launched a coup d'etat. The takeover was peaceful because U.S. Ambassador John Stevens called in American Marines to keep the peace, and the new Hawaiian government quickly requested to be annexed by the U.S.
Wow. Harrison, while denying that the U.S. government had played a hand in the monarchy's overthrow, supported the annexation treaty and sent it to the Senate for ratification. The Senate, however, declined to act in the final days of Harrison's administration, and the incoming President Cleveland would quickly withdraw the treaty.
That's right.
Hawaii annexation? Not yet.
Nope.
Well, on March 4th, 1893, Harrison will attend Cleveland's inauguration and then head on home to Indianapolis. Private citizen once more.
That's just it. And we'll see what private citizen Ben Harrison gets into when we return from these messages. The Dead Presidents Podcast is brought to you in part by L.F. Nothstein, who publishes this important notice. Adam and Harry Nothstein, aged 17 and 19 years respectively, have left my bed and board. I hereby give notice that I shall not be responsible for any debts contracted by them or any depredations they may commit. I have given them clear. You heard that, listeners. The Nothstein boys are on the loose. They're out from under their father's roof, and he's washed his hands of them. So don't expect him to reimburse you if you lend them money, or if you fall victim to their pillaging and plundering. Adam and Harry Nothstein are all grown up now, and will have to face the consequences of their own actions without Daddy bailing them out. They're probably out there laying waste to the countryside as we speak. So our listeners would be well advised to board up their homes and steer clear of these two young marauders. That's a message from our sponsor, L.F. Nothstein.
Now a word from our sponsor, Detective J.R. Nicholson, who publishes this important notice. $200 reward. A reward of $200 is offered for the detection and arrest of Lincoln B. Shattuck, who is wanted at Davenport, Nebraska for rape committed on the 13-year-old daughter of John Walter. Shattuck is about 30 years old, 6 feet high, humped back, eyes blue, brown hair and mustache, has a sneaky appearance. Address your correspondence to Detective J.R. Nicholson, Davenport, Nebraska. Listeners, be on the lookout for the vile and malevolent child rapist Lincoln B. Shattuck. There are a lot of 6-foot, 30-year-olds with blue eyes and brown hair out there, but most of them don't have humped backs or sneaky appearances. When it comes to the loathsome Lincoln B. Shattuck, those characteristics are a dead giveaway. So if you happen to see a sneaky-looking humpback lurking near the playground, drop a line to Detective J.R. Nicholson, and that $200 reward could be yours.
We're also proud to be sponsored by J.C. Power, who has an exciting announcement. Milk twice each day. The Pine Grove Dairy Delivery Wagon will cover the route twice daily, each morning and evening, until further notice. You heard that, listeners. For all you milkaholics out there, we know that just one milk delivery per day is not enough to satiate the milk-craving demon that dwells inside you. And for any wives whose husbands aren't getting it done in the bedroom, you now have twice as many opportunities to screw the milkman. That's a message from our sponsor, JC Power.
I'd just like to add that husbands who use Osmanli's Oriental sexual pills have nothing to worry about.
That's right. Your wife isn't fucking the milkman.
And now, back to the show. And we're back. Benjamin Harrison has left the White House.
That's it. And what's he going to get up to? Well, he's going to reestablish a small but lucrative law practice, handling a handful of cases for large fees. He's going to be active in Civil War veterans organizations and serves on the board of trustees for Purdue University. He wrote articles on government and politics for Ladies' Home Journal, which were later published as a book, This Country of Ours.
Yep, and more of his speeches and writings are going to be published in another book, Views of an Ex-President. In 1894, he spends a few months in California delivering law lectures at Stanford University. That same year, he's in a campaign on behalf of the Republican Party, which recaptures the House of Representatives. He will argue that Democrats' policies, especially lowering tariffs, were responsible for the Panic of 1893.
Yep.
And in 1896, Indiana Republican State Committee is going to endorse Harrison for president, which will prompt him to publish a letter stating, quote, "There has never been an hour since I left the White House that I have felt a wish to return to it."
That's it.
Indiana Republicans trying to make non-consecutive second terms into a thing, and Harrison saying absolutely not to that.
No. He is going to give only one speech in favor of Republican nominee William McKinley, in which he actually barely mentions McKinley, instead heavily criticizing pro-silver Democratic nominee William Jennings Bryan. In 1897, he earned an $80,000 legal fee representing the nation of Venezuela in an international arbitration over a border dispute with British Guiana. He prepared an 800-page brief and delivered a 5-day, 25-hour closing argument before the tribunal in Paris. Wow.
A whole week of Ben Harrison.
Well, that's going to be a hard-earned victory. Or is it?
Well, he ended up losing the case, and he complained that the arbitrators had played politics and ignored the law. And you got President McKinley in there.
That's it.
And Harrison is going to come out believing that the McKinley administration's acquisition of the Philippines after the Spanish-American War was a, quote, sad mistake. He said, quote, "Why should we do anything more than to secure a snug little harbor for a coaling station? We must have coaling stations in various parts of the world, but I do not think we want with these extensive territories."
Yeah.
Harrison, not an imperialist.
Indeed not.
Republican Party going that way anyway.
That's it. Harrison is going to remarry, becoming the third president to do so after John Tyler and Millard Fillmore, in 1896. Caroline Harrison's first cousin, Mary Mamie Dimmick, had been close to the Harrison family since his 1888 campaign. She had once been married, but her husband died 3 months after the wedding. Mamie She provides a comforting presence, and Harrison enjoys her quiet companionship on long, mostly silent walks. She moved into the White House in September 1890, where she often played billiards with the president, and served as assistant to the First Lady, and later as a nurse during her final illness.
That's right, and after leaving the presidency, Harrison corresponded with Mamie often, and they arranged numerous visits to see each other. Harrison's children, Russell Harrison and Mary Harrison McKee, did not like Mamie and grew to resent her closeness to their father. Mary wrote, quote, "I freely confess that I so thoroughly despise the woman that I cannot form an unbiased opinion."
Ouch.
When Harrison and Mamie announced their engagement, a story published in Democratic newspapers and used as a source on our top 5 presidential cradle robbers, where Harrison earned the number 4 spot, salaciously reported that the First Lady had been jealous of Mamie and had tried to oust her from the White House, with Harrison overruling his wife's wishes. The source for that story was most likely Mary's husband, Robert McKee, whom Harrison described as, quote, malicious.
That's right. Harrison biographer Charles W. Calhoun argued that there is no evidence in the writings of Harrison, Caroline, or Mamie to suggest such a rift, and that Caroline seemed happy to have Mamie as a caretaker in her final months. Harrison's children, who were older than their new stepmother, did not attend the wedding, and he was heartbroken when they distanced themselves from him after the marriage. He was 25 years older than Mamie. He was 62, and she 37. Approximately 9 months after the wedding, she gave birth to his third child, Elizabeth.
Well, Harrison once again wasting no time, impregnating his wife.
That's it.
He must be taking Osmanli's Oriental sexual pills.
That's a distinct possibility.
Mm-hmm.
And that's going to lead to Harrison's death.
It makes it sound like the pills killed him. We're going to lose our sponsorship. Well, that's going to bring us to February 1901. Harrison will develop pneumonia, and with only Mamie at his side, he died at his home in Indianapolis on March 13th, 1901, at the age of 67. His last words were, quote, "Are the doctors here? Doctor, my lungs."
A sad end to Benjamin Harrison, although I do have alternative facts as to the cause of death of Benjamin Harrison. Electricity was installed in the White House during the Harrison's tenure, but he and his wife were too scared to touch the switches. They often just let the lights on and let the maintenance man just shut them in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
And Harrison, wanting to confront his fear, began switching a light switch on and off, on and off, on and off, over and over again, and unfortunately was electrocuted.
That's one theory.
The last words were still reported to be the same.
Yeah. Yeah, Harrison's not trusting this newfangled electricity, not wanting to be the first president electrocuted while in office.
Indeed not. So let's talk about the character and personality of Benjamin Harrison, our nation's 23rd chief executive. Well, Ben Harrison was described by the Complete Book of U.S. Presidents as a stocky figure with a large, paunchy torso set atop short, stubby legs. Harrison stood about 5 feet 6 inches tall and had a fair complexion, blue eyes, light brown hair. Spoke in a soft, high voice, and as we said earlier, known as one of the better extemporaneous speakers of his time. Personality-wise, though, Harrison is known as the human iceberg. He's stiff and formal in dealing with people. He dislikes small talk. And he's not one to tolerate inefficiency or incompetence. He tackles problems through mastery of detail. And although he lacks both charisma and the common touch, he's widely respected for his intelligence, honesty, attention to duty, and diligence. According to biographer Harry Sievers, integrity formed the backbone of Harrison's character. His active intellect, firmly backed by moral courage, he was regarded as a bulwark of political decency.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think he was known to be a little more warm and affectionate among his close family and friends.
Yeah.
But in public office, yeah, more of an iceberg. Especially when people come a-calling for, looking for office seekers. He just really shut down. I know there was one story where a guy who actually was a good friend of his came on office-seeking business, and Harrison just, like, addressed him very formally and didn't want to, didn't show him any kind of affection.
Yeah.
When you're coming asking for favors.
That's it. Also, a pretty religious man. He has that in common with James Garfield.
Mm-hmm.
James Garfield was a minister there for a spell. Harrison considered going the same route.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, really kind of like morally upright kind of guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, not the most charismatic, but he won some admiration.
Indeed.
From a lot of people.
That's it. And, well, can you possibly learn any more about Ben Harrison outside of this episode? There's a couple book recommendations. You could always check out Lew Wallace's campaign biography of Ben Harrison by the author of Ben-Hur. And then the aforementioned Harry Sievers has the very scholarly 3-volume biography of Ben Harrison. If you are so into Ben Harrison that you think he deserves a 3-volume alongside Andrew Jackson and Teddy Roosevelt, that's there.
Some listeners might get to the end of this episode and be like, what the F? That's all the Ben Harrison there is? I need a 3-volume biography.
Well, it's available.
If you want a more concise biography, you could go with the aforementioned Charles W. Calhoun's entry in the American President series.
Indeed.
I did check that one out, and it was pretty good.
Yeah, as we've said before, the American President series, concise but nice.
Mm-hmm.
If you're looking for a really good introduction into the lives of these chief executives. And that's pretty much all we got for books on Ben Harrison. And that's going to bring us to some final words on him. Not from us, but from his contemporaries. Starting with Theodore Roosevelt, who, in 1890, had these words: "Damn the president. He is a cold-blooded, narrow-minded, prejudiced, obstinate, timid old psalm-singing Indianapolis politician."
Ouch.
Yeah. Teddy Roosevelt, not a fan of Ben Harrison in 1890.
Yeah, hard words from Civil Service Commissioner Theodore Roosevelt. Well, we've got James Whitcomb Riley, who said in 1901, quote, "One of the characteristics of General Harrison always commanded my profound respect, his fearless independence and stand for what he believed to be right and just. A fearless man inwardly commands respect, and above everything else, Harrison was fearless and just."
Huh. Some nicer words there. We also have William Dudley Folk, who in 1892 said this, quote, "4 years ago, our civil service reformers in Indiana were all supporting the Republican Party and were all active supporters of Mr. Harrison. After 4 years' experience of his administration, they are now for Cleveland."
Harrison getting no love from the civil service reformers. despite, also not pleasing the party bosses.
That's it.
You just can't win.
He wasn't gonna kowtow to them.
Well, then we've got Henry Adams, who said in a work published in 1918, quote, Mr. Harrison was an excellent president, a man of ability and force, perhaps the best president the Republican Party had put forth since Lincoln's death.
Some pretty strong support from Henry Adams. And that's going to bring us to the end of Benjamin Harrison, but not quite the end of our show. As always, we're going to leave the final sound on Ben Harrison to the Constitutionalists. This is Benjamin Harrison.
Thanks for listening.
Does not soar very high. I am not a Julius Caesar nor a Napoleon, but a plain Hoosier colonel with no more relish for a fight than for a good breakfast. God has placed upon our head a diadem and has laid at our feet power and wealth beyond definition or calculation. But we must not forget that we take these gifts upon the condition that justice and mercy shall hold the reins of power, and that the upward avenues of hope shall be free to all the people. Indiscriminate denunciation of the rich is mischievous. It perverts the mind, poisons the heart, and furnishes an excuse to crime. No poor man was ever made richer or happier by it. It is quite as illogical to despise a man because he is rich as because he is poor. Not what a man has, but what he is, settles his class. We cannot right matters by taking from one what he has honestly acquired, to bestow upon another what he has not earned.